So tonight's session is A Course in Miracles. And we're going to watch a video shortly. Obviously, all the sessions are recorded and shared publicly to support others in these teachings. And I'm Yinka and I run Hear My Voice Book Club, which is an inspirational self-development books. All the events can be found on Meetup. We do have WhatsApp groups keeping people connected. I'm going to flick through these. So for next week, we've got Jodie Spencer Tuesday. We've got Michael coming to join us again. It's not for Course in Miracles. It's for the Why Is This Happening to Me Again next week. We've got children's meditation this Friday. Oh, this is for this week, actually. It's showing. We've got Jodie Spencer's meditation Sunday, cardio workout Saturday, Sunday. And if you're on the call and on the one course, it's our final one on Sunday. We do have Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway tomorrow at 5 AM club. We do have the special on tomorrow.
I have a suggestion.
Yeah.
How about if we do Heal the Fear and Do It Anyway?
Say that again.
How about if we do Heal the Fear and Do It Anyway?
That would be a really good title.
Like, fear's not required, you know? It's just, I mean, if you want to go with it, you can go with it. It's okay. It's just not required and it can be healed. So instead of just feeling it, maybe you want to heal it and then,
Feel it.
you know, see what shows up when you make a space. You know, make a clean and open space in here that isn't filled with all kinds of crazy stuff. And, you know, it sounded like from the little response that that Jeannie gave me from you in the chat room today, that some things really struck you. So we're, you know, let's go for healing the fear. Yes,
I'm going to put that as the title tomorrow.
Sweet.
Heal the feel and do it anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. Our monthly book club is Paulo Coelho, The Alchemist, and that's on Thursday, the 7th of September, 10:30 and 8:30. One of my favourite books, which the group chose for the second time round. And we do have in-person event in Manchester and Liverpool, second Wednesday. Say again, Sandy. Did you say something, Sandy?
Choose a different one next time.
Yeah, oh yeah, choose a different one next time. And we do have sessions in Liverpool as well, they're in person. And the book club is going to become in person in Manchester shortly as well. We're just talking to a place that wanted me to come and run it in Manchester, so the book club will be taken there too. But we'll still keep it online for all those, so don't worry. So Hear My Voice Book Club runs non-profit events, so everybody can take part regardless of financial status. But any donations, if anyone feels inspired or would like to support Michael in his teaching, I ask for all donations to go directly to Michael. I'm just going to do some shoulder rolls just to loosen up the body and get it ready for Michael's video. So nice deep breaths in, draw up the shoulders and exhale through the mouth. Nice deep breath in and exhale. One more time, nice deep breath in and exhale. So tonight we have The Name of God is My Inheritance. I'm not sure, Michael, if you want to share anything.
Yeah, the first thing that comes to me is that there's been a lot of terrorism done in the name of that three-letter word God. So I want to be clear that we're not talking about the terrorists, the terrorism.
Can you shut the fuck up?
Oh, sorry, Michael. We've got.
Oh, that's okay. Bless you.
I'll just remove him.
So we're looking to recognize that we are each steeped, and one of the easiest ways to prove that to yourself is just hold a newborn child, where the truth of being has not been lost. We're each steeped in the presence of this thing called love. We all started there. That exists in all of us. And unfortunately, because of generational patterns, because of community patterns, because of cultural patterns, that state gets blocked. And it's easy to forget who we are. So to recognize and remember who you are is one of the biggest steps you could possibly take in healing. And so if you have any destructive or negative affiliations with that word God, we'll ask you to remove them. We're not talking about religion here. We're talking about the fact of we as human beings exist as the presence of love. And if you go back into the ancient teachings, that word was an alternative word for what people made up for the creator. And so we're looking to see what has to be done to return to a state of being, who we are as love. That's what we're here to do.
So I'm going to play the video and then we'll come back and you can ask Michael any questions at the end that you'd like to ask. We have the right video tonight. Yeah. So I shall mute us all. Ready?
So welcome to A Course in Miracles. Tonight we're going to look at lesson 184 from the Course, The Name of God is My Inheritance. We've already got the board set up actually from some workshops that we did earlier in the week, and I'd like to just kind of explain a little bit about what's on the board. So you've got that starting point and we don't have to do this all over again. When Jeannie opened the workshop on Sunday, she asked everybody the question, how many have ever held a newborn child? And then asked each person to tap into the essence of the newborn and describe the essence of the newborn. Here's the list she got. Peace, pure, joy, inner sense, awesome presence, love, sweetness, beauty, miracle, and bliss. Now, this is a question that we've asked of tens of thousands of people all over the globe, and 100% of the time, it doesn't matter what culture we're in, what language people speak, their answer when they describe the essence of the newborn is always some variation on the theme of love. A second question that she asked was, how many have ever done something they regret? And tap into and put what you were feeling that motivated you to do what you now regret into a single word. And interestingly enough, nothing that was on this list showed up, and it never does when we ask this question around the globe. And so the answers that came for the feelings that motivated people to do what they regretted were bored, disconnected, anger, shame, guilt, rage, hopeless, terror, hurt, and grief. And there's a reason for that. And the reason is that if we're not functioning as love, as human beings, then the mind is using corrupt data to produce literally the world that we see. And you don't need to know any more about what's going on in the world than to know your mind is using corrupt data to know that your mind is off base. And so what we're going to be looking at is this particular lesson, how it relates to tapping us back into who we are and the tools for removing those things that don't belong in us. The major tool being that of forgiveness. Now, we live in a culture that tells us forgiveness is about how I let you off the hook for what's happening inside of me. And so we'll hear people, I'll often hear from somebody, they'll say, well, you know, I've already forgiven everybody, my mother, my father, my sister, my brother, my kids, my parents, my neighbors, my employer, my former wife, my present wife. I've even forgiven my future wives. And what I know is that person has done no forgiveness work today, zero. There's been no forgiveness if the languaging is still about how you forgave them. Or people go, well, I've forgiven myself already. We know there's no forgiveness work if you're talking about forgiving yourself, because forgiveness isn't about yourself or others. That's actually a Greek act of pardoning. We've been brainwashed into thinking that forgiveness is about letting them off the hook for what's happening inside of us. So if something from this side of the board is moving in you, there is no one to forgive for that, because what's moving in you belongs to you. And if I let you off the hook for what's moving in me, what have I done to change what's happening in me? If you go back into Course in Miracles, You go back into the first century Aramaic language, which is the teaching of Yeshua the first time he came around. The word forgive doesn't mean I let you off the hook for what's happening inside of me. It means a tool with which I collapse my perceptual world and have access to what underlies these feelings and remove them. So when you think forgiveness, think removal as opposed to letting somebody off the hook. Now, in the ancient Aramaic, there was a system that was developed to help people to see past what they believed they knew into a deeper truth. And so parable in Aramaic means parallel meaning. It lays something out that people think they understand, and then it gives a deeper parallel meaning that it lays beside it. And in using that parable, people come to understand. Things get to sneak past the mind that thinks it knows, and we start to understand differently. So I'd like to present a parable for this process of understanding what the Course is saying. And we all know what an airplane propeller is. We know that an airplane propeller is a pivot point, and spinning around the pivot point, there are 4 arms. Let's imagine that we've started the airplane. So the propeller is spinning. And we bring somebody from the jungles of South America. Now, this guy has never seen anything more complex than a dugout canoe. You know, they chopped a tree down, they hauled it out, they paddled away in their dugout canoe. Most complex thing that he's ever seen. So when we bring him to the tarmac and stand him in front of an airplane propeller, he has no preconceptions to interfere with what he sees. And he looks at the propeller. Does he see 4 arms spinning around a pivot point? No. What does he see? He sees a shiny silver disc. He sees something that absolutely isn't there. His mind is making its best guess at what's there. In the ancient Aramaic, these images in the mind, these perceptions, were called appearances. Remember, this man Yeshua says, don't judge by appearances. You know, if this guy wants to do a behavior based on his misperception of an airplane propeller, thinking it's a shiny silver disc, what's going to happen if he decides he wants to feel what the friction feels like on his fingertips? It's got a pretty serious problem happening, because he's not seeing what's there. And when we say to him, but sir, that's not a shiny silver disc, don't touch it. He says, well, it's got to be a shiny silver disc. I see it. I mean, if I see it, it must be there. Not the truth. He might bring all of the authorities he knows from his jungle culture, you know, having access maybe to thousands of years of experts, and he brings them all to the tarmac, and they all stand there and insist that this is a shiny silver disc because they all see it. Because everybody insists something's true, does that make it actual? My offering is, no, it doesn't. And so the process of forgiveness, as taught in the Course, has nothing to do with the world of shiny, or of propellers. It has to do with the world of shiny silver discs. And it has to do with removing the root of our misperceptions. In fact, if we look at the picture in this man's mind, that picture is a symbol of the airplane propeller. And so here's where our lesson starts out. And it says, you live by symbols. You have made up names for everything you see. Everything becomes a separate entity identified by its own name. Now, I like to interject, along with these kinds of thoughts, Einstein, who's probably one of the most well-known teachers of a higher level of living than most on the planet. And he says this: if you think you're separate or separated from the rest of humanity, you're living in an optical delusion. your mind is making up a symbol that's not accurate. And so this lesson goes on to say, by this you carve it out of unity. That is the symbol that you see. The Course talks about in different places that there's no such thing as a body. You know, at no time does the body exist. And yet people see bodies. What is a body? Well, if we look at this metaphor, we see that the rate of spin of the propeller is too fast for his mind or his perceptual apparatus to keep up with, so his brain makes its best guess in making up its symbol. If he could see what was actually there, he'd be seeing these forearms spinning around a pivot point. Let's take it to the next level, and let's imagine that this is what we call a body. If you were able to see what we call a body, a symbol in the mind, if you're able to see what it was, you'd see this whirring mass of electrons, protons, neutrons, and light. You would not see a body. And when someone looks at that whirring mass of energy, they make up a symbol called a body. The only place the body exists is between our ears. There is no such thing in the world as a body. You know, we could go back and look at the lesson, which I think is perhaps one of the most important lessons in the Course, that says, what is the world? And many people want to play in the realm of, you made up the world, where that lesson in the Course starts out, and it uses the word world in two different ways. And it says the world is false perception. Born of error, it says. Would we successfully be able to say to this guy from the jungles, as he looks at this shiny silver disc in his mind, that his world is made up of false perception? And the Course uses the word world in two distinctly different ways. It will use a lowercase world to represent the world of false perception or appearances or symbols, and then we'll use a capital W world to represent what is actual. Now, there's another lesson in the Course that says, think not you made the world. Illusions, yes. But what is true in heaven and earth is beyond your naming. The only place that the Course aims its tools at, especially the tool of forgiveness, is the world between your ears. Nothing to do with letting anybody else off the hook for what's between your ears. And most people still live by these symbols in the mind, and they're tricked by those symbols because they think they're real. So this carving out of this unbroken wholeness that exists in the world is the way that the world's perception is achieved, this lesson says. It says, by this you designate its special attributes and set it off from other things by emphasizing the space surrounding it. This space you lay between all things which you give a different name, all happenings in terms of place and time, all bodies which are greeted by a name. Now, my offering is that we live in what perhaps is a 200 trillion bit world. And all of humanity, down through time, has taken 5,000 pieces of the 200 trillion bit world and made up a story and programmed each and every one of us with that story. And if we're living in that symbol, then our story cuts us off from the unity where wholeness and real true aliveness can be found. And it is the removal of the root of that 5,000 piece story that gives us the opportunity to begin to do something different. So this world of symbols has symbols for everything it sees. So the symbol for this shiny silver disc, or pardon me, for this airplane propeller is this shiny silver disc. The symbol for this energy field that people call a body is a word, body. And so we have a symbol, and then we have a symbol of a symbol. Now, let's imagine that we allow this guy to hang out on the tarmac weeks, months, years, and he and all of his friends develop a language about shiny silver discs. Can he say one single word that is true about this, with all the language that he has about this? And here we sit, inheriting a language that are symbols of symbols and trying to get to the truth with it. You'll notice the Course says, throw this book away and come empty-handed. Actually, I think it means empty-headed. The Course is very clear. The truth cannot be spoken in words. You're not going to find it in that book. And I see people arguing over, oh, this is the truth of what the Course said. There's no truth in it. What words can be used for, other than to represent truth, because this is the truth, this is a symbol. It's a false image, it's a false picture. It's carved out of something greater than itself. And so, when we look for truth in words, we make a mistake. But what words can do is they can show you how to remove the root of the symbols in your mind that are false. One of the ways you can tell that you're stuck in one of those symbols in your mind is you're over here on the right side of the board with some form of hostility or fear. Hostility or fear acts to rob us of awareness of who we are. And you'll notice that the culture's pretty much locked in there, playing that game. We hear a man today on television going to the UN telling the world that he's going to blow another country off the face of the earth. How bizarre does that language get when it works with symbols of symbols that are based in false perception and convince us that there's something other than this unbroken wholeness? And I use that term to represent, or comes from a fellow named David Bohm, who's a physicist, who did some amazing work in the realm of really healing this idea of separateness. And he talks about that our true individuality can only be realized when we realize ourselves as part of this unbroken wholeness. And so to recognize there are symbols of symbols, and most people are looking for the truth out of those symbols of symbols. And you can't say one true word about this when you're describing this. And most people think that when they're looking at this, they're actually looking out there at that. Most people think that they have a set of peepholes through which they look out and see what's happening in the world. And that's a total fraud. The eye is a one-way valve. The eye does not see anything outside of itself. The eye brings in information. The information that comes in causes brain cells to fire. In fact, we're going to see in a few minutes that the CIA actually teaches A Course in Miracles, believe it or not. We'll quote from their writing. So, we do not have eyes that see anything. We've been tricked. We've been fooled. Information comes in, brain cells fire, and the mind constructs perception. Perception, the Course says, is something that we made up to take the place of what the Creator gave us. The Creator gave us something that we can't talk about with any of the words of the world, lowercase w. And we made this up to take the place of that. And as you begin to dissolve through forgiveness this world, then you create an opening for a different kind of experience. And to recognize that there's something unspeakable that if the tools are used, you can directly experience. And what we're looking to do is to support people and inspire people to have a personal experience, personally experienced. So this lesson goes on to say, this space you lay between all things, to which you give a different name, all happenings in terms of place and time, all bodies which are greeted by a different name. So we create these spaces that reflect separateness, but they're all part of a perceptual trick that we've been brainwashed to see. So this lesson goes on and says, the space you see as setting off all things from one another is the means by which the world's perception is achieved. Now, would that be the capital W world or the lowercase world? The world's perception. Clearly, the lowercase world. You see something where nothing is. You know, this guy sees a shiny silver disc. It's not there. As well, you see nothing where there is unity. A space between all things and you. Thus do you think that you have given life in separation. So this perceptual system operates off of the data that comes into it, and according to what data comes in, there are brain cells firing that produce this world that we see. Remember several years ago we had a woman, we have a teaching center in the Ozarks in southern Missouri called Heartland. And we had a woman come, and she was a city girl and was kind of, had fear about the outdoors, and we're in a about 10 miles or 7 miles outside of a town of 200 people, so it's a pretty remote area. And she's in the building that she's in, and she goes out one night to get a drink of water, and she goes into the kitchen, and she sees a huge brown rat on the kitchen counter. And she screeches and runs back off into bed. When she gets up in the morning, she goes back into the kitchen, and there's a brown towel laying on the counter. But she didn't see a brown towel. She saw something that wasn't there, which is one of the things that fear does. If you go to lesson 46 in the course, it says, forgiveness undoes what fear has produced. It is a means by which illusions disappear. Now, in the Aramaic language, the word illusion does not mean what this culture calls it. The word illusion in Aramaic means measured. You remember Yeshua says, as you measure, it will be measured unto you. As you put information into this database, it will be fed back to you as the perceptual world that you see. You'll notice how often the Course talks about the world you see, the world you see, the world you see, the world you see, the world you see. Literally, perception is a construct that comes from inside of us. So this lesson goes on to say, by this split, you think you're established as a unity which functions with its own independent will. Then all kinds of images exist in our minds that motivate us to believe and to behave as though those images are true. Any image that's linked to hostility or fear isn't true about the creation. It's something we've measured into our minds, and then when it's stimulated into activity, it's measured back to us as pictures. We each have, you might remember a few years ago, the FCC in its great wisdom decided that instead of television programming being made of pictures, they decreed that all television broadcasts would become digital. So at the time they were analog, and basically what that means is every television station has what they call a carrier wave, a certain frequency they work on, and they superimposed analog images on that carrier wave. It got to your television set separated out those analog images and showed you a picture. Well, they decided it was all going to be digital, which meant we're done with analog. The FCC decided your tax dollars would go to pay for new televisions or converter boxes for people who wouldn't buy new televisions. and or you had to buy a new television. And now those carrier waves are there and they superimpose digital images. And what that converter box does is it converts those digital images to analog, to pictures. It's interesting, if you go to the opening words in the book of John in Aramaic, it does not say in the beginning was the Word and the Word became flesh. What it says is in the beginning was the mind energy and the mind energy became flesh. When we put digital information, mind energy into this system, we have a digital to analog converter. It turns it into pictures. We literally create a whole world out of those pictures. So if you go to the CIA's website, cia.gov, the Center for the Study of Intelligence has a book which you can download for free. It's called The Psychology of Intelligence Analysts. And the second chapter in that book is entitled, Why Can't We See What's There to Be Seen? Let's hear what they say. The process of perception links people to their environment, and it is critical to accurate understanding of the world about us. Now, as they're using the word world there, which world would it be, the uppercase or the lowercase world? It would be the uppercase. So what they're saying is that we have a system that connects us to what the Creator created. And the system is perception. If the perception's off base, then we're going to have difficulty. The process of perception links people to their environment, to the actuality. Accurate intelligence analysis obviously requires accurate perception. Yet research into human perception demonstrates that the process is beset by many pitfalls. Does that sound familiar from the course? Here we got the CIA having the conversation. So they go on to say, people tend to think of perception as a passive process. There's some interesting Harvard research that says that in a time frame where 10,000 brain cells are found, there are actually 10,000 measurable units of electrical activity happening. The max amount of information that goes into the conscious mind, into our perceptual world, is 9 bits. So 10,000 brain cells fire, 9 bits of data, and it's been estimated that the actuality in that time frame is perhaps 20 trillion bits. So here we are in a 20 trillion bit world, living in a 5,000 bit story, and believing that our perception is accurate about that rather than accurate about the content of our own minds. So the CIA goes on to say, we see, hear, taste, smell, feel stimuli impinged upon our senses. We think that if we are at all objective, we record what is actually there. Yet perception is a demonstrably active rather than passive process. It constructs rather than records reality. So our minds construct this world of pictures. Again, that's why the Course so often says the world you see. And says things like the world you see is a reflection of the content of your mind. It's not a reflection of what's going on in the world, or rarely is. Perception implies understanding as well as awareness. It is a process of inference in which people construct their own version of reality on the basis of information provided through the 5 senses. So what the CIA is telling us, and God only knows how many millions they spent writing this book and doing this study, what they're telling us is that each of us lives in a world of perceptual output in our own minds. And that sometimes that can relatively accurately represent the actuality that the Creator created. You know, there are some people who say, no, there's no world except the one I created. Please read the Course. Think not you made the world. Illusions, yes. The shiny silver disc, the body is an illusion. It's something you've measured into your mind, and it gets measured back to you. The whole process about forgiveness is to take all inaccurate perceptual data and remove it from your mind. Hence, the Course says, come empty-handed. Again, I think it probably meant empty-headed. Come free of those perceptual constructs that are not accurate about the actuality. If you look back through the ages, when people decided to get out of their insane cultures, people stepped away from the idea of war and politics and conflict and went into a deeper study of what was actually going on, you'll find that invariably they all came to the conclusion that it was about love. Now, each of us has been given generations and generations and generations of conflicted data. There's an interesting metaphor for that in the Old Testament where you hear the story of the Jews wandering in the desert for 40 years. Now, when you think about that, here's a pretty bright group of people wandering in a 30 square mile area lost for 40 years? I mean, that doesn't make any sense. They weren't talking about a physical, hot, sandy place. The desert is a code word for the unconscious that they were perceiving, and the average person goes through about 40 years of their lives before they start to scratch their head and say, gee, maybe there's something else going on here. Maybe this isn't all about what's going on in my mind. Or maybe what I need to do is realize that what's going on in my mind is what I need to deal with. Instead of thinking that what I'm looking at is actually external to me. So the lesson goes on to say, what are these names by which the world becomes a series of discrete events, of things ununified, of bodies kept apart, and holding bits of mind as separate awarenesses? You gave these names to them, establishing perception as you wish to have perception be. In other words, everybody that shows up triggers constructs in the mind. And when we can forgive those constructs, then we can return to the truth of being, that is, return to the truth of love, rather than be controlled by those perceptual constructs of the generations that are based in hostility and fear. And it is the removal of the root of those constructs that allows us to truly return to functioning as human beings. So it goes on to say the nameless things were given names, and thus reality was given them as well. You remember in the Old Testament, so you had the right to name everything. When you name it, you give it a quality. You measure into your mind something, and when that something shows up in your mind, then you get to live with that quality and the energy of that. So it's all about correcting content rather than letting somebody else off the hook for what's happening inside of us. So it goes on to say, for what is named is given meaning and will then be seen as meaningful, a cause of true effect with consequence inherent in itself. In other words, a belief that it's out there rather than in here. This is the way reality is made by partial vision, purposely set against a given truth. So each person lives in a perceptual construct that is of their own making and reflects the content of their minds. If you don't like the perceptual world you're living in, you have to go to the cause of that perceptual world, and the cause isn't out there. The cause is in here. I know one of the questions we'll oftentimes ask people, they'll say, well, Charlie made me so mad, I'm just so upset with Charlie. And I'll say, how long have you known Charlie? He says, 5 years. So let's go back 6 years ago. Do you remember having this quality of mad? Yeah. 100% of the time the answer is yes. So you carried something into relationship with Charlie, and now you think Charlie's responsible for what you carried into the relationship. And you want a peaceful relationship with Charlie. You want a conflict-free relationship with Charlie. Guess what? You can't have a conflict-free relationship with anybody unless you're a conflict-free being. You can't have a peaceful relationship with anyone unless you're connected to who you are and remember who you are as the active presence of love and incarnate as love rather than the false self that's based in hostility and fear. So again, this is the way reality is made. Perceptual constructs are made against partial vision purposely set against a given truth. One of the lines that the Course offers that I find rather interesting is where it says, innocence is maintained or achieved by the ego by blaming somebody else. So once I start to talk about Charlie, I can pretend I'm not responsible for what's inside of me. I can say, well, that's Charlie's fault I'm experiencing that. And we've developed a test for determining whether or not what you're feeling is yours or not. And the test is pretty interesting to apply. How do you tell whether or not what you're feeling is yours or not? Are you feeling it? If you're feeling it, guess where it is? It's in your physiology. It belongs to you. It doesn't belong to anybody else. And if you don't like what you're feeling, then you've got to change your illusions. You've got to change what you've measured into your structure. It can be helpful to have a model for doing this process. You know, Yeshua is a powerful model for living as the presence of love where there's insanity. But there's another model that actually is available to us today on the big screen. Powerful, powerful film if you haven't seen it. It might be a place to go and plan to breathe a lot and do some forgiveness work, because it reflects some very deep, deep insanity. But at the same time as it reflects that insanity, it reflects what a real human life would look like living in the insane world as a human. The film is called Hacksaw Ridge. Very violent war movie. A young man named Desmond Doss, when he's a child, almost kills his brother. And he says, I will not do violence ever again. And along comes World War II. And all of his friends are signing up for war. And he feels like he should go and do the same, except that he won't kill. He won't touch a gun. And this is a true story. I mean, the guy passed away about 5 or 6 years ago, and they actually interview him at the end of the film. So this young man's induced into the army, and they are getting ready to hand out their guns, and he won't take it. He won't touch it. And of course, what do the people who live on this side of the board do? They make fun of him. What a fool he is. How silly that is. What, you're going to go to war and not have a weapon? And he says, well, I decided that my friends were serving and I wanted to do that, but I'm going to serve by putting people back together rather than taking them apart. He becomes a medic. And this kid, because he will not do violence, he will not touch a weapon, and of course, he's with a bunch of guys that are rah, we're out here to kill somebody. He takes a lot of guff, beatings. And it comes to the point where, well, there's one scene in it, without giving too much away, there's one scene in it where somebody just beat the living tar out of him. I mean, he's bruised and broken. And this is one of his own men. And the sergeant comes in, and the sergeant's kind of feeling a little bit of compassion for him. He's like, okay, tell me who did it, and we'll take care of this for you. He said, oh, I just fell out of bed, Sarge. He won't turn somebody in. He's not going to play that game. He's going to function as a responsible human being. And it's so powerful to watch him, and they actually decide to court-martial him. And that means that he's going to spend 16 years in prison because he won't touch a gun. And he says, well, if that's what I have to do, that's what I'll do, but I'm not going to renounce what I believe. Powerful thing to watch a human being do. Fortunately, his father, who's went through World War I, and his whole life is based in the trauma of his experience of World War I, was in the military with a man who's now a high-level general, and he contacts this general, and the general interrupts and says, this man wants to be a medic and save the lives on the battlefield, and you're going to allow him to do that. So they take him in, abuse after abuse after abuse, but they go to a very real battle in Japan, Hacksaw Ridge, and they are fighting this battle, on top of this ridge, and they're not winning. And it's hell. And so the leader of the troop says, okay, guys, off the ridge. We're going to get out of here. We're going to call in the big guns off of the ship that's offshore and get them to blast these Japanese. And so all the tough guys who play the game of no man left behind, they show a couple of scenes where they've got an excuse for, well, that guy's not going to live anyway, so we'll just leave him here. Let's get the hell out of here. And they all go off the ridge except for this one young man. And there's a powerful statement in the scriptures that talks about, you can be on a battlefield. If you're in harmony with me, you can be on a battlefield where 1,000 or 10,000 are killed and you can't be touched. So this young man stays up on top of the ridge, and there are these 16-inch guns that are just lobbing hellfire all along the ridge. And you watch him, it's such a great demonstration of the principle, because he sits there and he waits for guidance. And he says, God, show me how to get one wounded man off this ridge. And you watch him, and he walks between the shells. True story. And he finds a man who's injured, and he lowers him, I don't know, 100 feet or so down the ridge. The soldiers, the tough guys who no man left behind, watch this, and they're like, oh, where did that come from? None of the tough guys go up to help him. After he's let that man down, he sits. He says, God, show me how to get one more. And he goes and finds another injured man, and he lowers him down the ridge. And he does it again, and again, and again, and again. 75 men who would have been dead up there, he lowered one at a time. And he didn't differentiate. He was a human being. It's actually a scene in it where he'd be tried for treason because there's a Japanese man who's injured, and this Japanese man is obviously terrified because he can't do anything, and this guy is there, and he comes over to him and he gives him some morphine and some care. He lowers a couple of injured Japanese down the ridge, and one of the tough guys down below, reporting to his captain or whatever rank he was, says, well, you know, he lowered down a couple of Japanese, but they didn't make it. In other words, we live on this side of the border, and we're not human. There's no human life in that. He's the only conscientious objector that has ever gotten the Congressional Medal of Honor. Single-handedly functioning as a human being. Yeah, there's a little story in the back of my book called Each Moment. It goes like this. Each moment of love, each moment of giving, each moment of happiness is a moment of living. Each moment of lying, each moment of resentment, each moment of lying is a moment of dying. All our moments add together like the digits in a sum, and the answer tells us plainly whether our life or death shall come. What do we do with each moment? When the stress is up and the chips are down and this corrupt data is operating in us, what do we do with it? And if we function as human beings, and you know, for me, this film is just such a powerful example to watch somebody under the worst conditions you can imagine choosing to function as love. And he does it. Several of the people that he saves are people that beat on him, wailed on him, tried to destroy him. It didn't matter to him. He had nothing but human life in him. Each of us is capable of that because each of us is a human life. But if we've inherited a multi-generational database that the world calls a body-mind unit that has all kinds of hostility or fear, then we can only begin to function as that which we are when we start to claim that which we are is done by naming ourselves that which we are, as this lesson talks about. The name of love is my inheritance. And it's when we claim that inheritance that we actually really, truly begin to function as we're designed to. This lesson goes on and speaks about there is another vision that remains a natural direction for the mind to channel its perception. It is hard to teach the mind 1,000 alien names and thousands more, yet you believe this is what learning means. It's one essential goal by which communication is achieved and concepts can be meaningfully shared. This is the sum of the inheritance the world bestows. Which world are we talking about now, uppercase or lowercase? Obviously, once again, lowercase. This is the sum of the inheritance the world bestows. And, you know, the way you can tell if you're making progress toward that goal, I don't know anybody that's finished the journey. But one of the ways you can tell that you're really making progress toward that goal is, can you be in the middle of your muddle? The stress is up and the chips are down and the stuff is moving in you. And can you just take a breath and take just one moment and check out of your perceptual world and tap into the active presence of love that you are and that you are a part of. If you can do that in the middle of your model, you'll be able to measure your progress. You know, the average person, when the hostility and fear starts to move, they're just all over what's there and they have no concept of who they actually are. This lesson is about being restored to who you actually are, even in the presence of your model. So again, this is the sum of the inheritance the world bestows, and everyone who learns to think that it is so accepts the signs and symbols that assert the world is real. It is for this they stand. They leave no doubt that what is named is there. Just like our fellow from the jungles, hey, there's a shiny silver disc. There's no doubt about that. I can see it. All perception is a skill made up by you to take the place of what the Creator gave you in creation. And what the Creator gave you in creation was a human life. Hold the newborn if you ever forget that. Tap into the truth of who we are as human beings. So the world, when it names something, leaves no doubt that it is there because it's been named. It can be seen as anticipated, and what denies it is true is but illusion, for it is the ultimate reality. To question it is madness. And you watch this young man as he questions all of the violence and all of the viciousness that he's surrounded by. He simply says, I don't choose to live there. And they're so bewildered watching him. These guys whose language and lives are based in hostility and fear and tough guy and all of that, they just can't comprehend that there's another way to live, that there's another possibility. Such is the teaching of the world, this lesson says. It is a phase of learning that everyone goes through, that everyone who comes must go through. But the sooner he perceives on what it rests, how questionable are its premises, how doubtful its results, the sooner does he question its effects. Another statement from that study, the CIA of perception, ties right here into this thought. It says, as already noted, what people in general and analysts in particular perceive and how readily they perceive it are strongly influenced by their past experiences, by their education, by their cultural values and role requirements, as well as by the stimuli received by their receptor organs. It's a powerful lesson in the Course that says, I do not see anything as it is now. Every perceptual construct is a reflection of content. And so this lesson, especially as in regard to self, I see nothing as it is. And well, you may be able to, this lesson goes on in the course, it's actually lesson 9, it says, I see nothing as it is now. And while you may be able to accept that intellectually, it is unlikely that that means anything to you as yet. However, understanding is not necessary. So the course lays out a whole series of exercises for those especially who are new to it. And you don't have to understand them, you don't have to believe them. The course just asks you to practice them. And as you practice them, what you'll be doing is you'll be building new brain cells of perception, a new way to conceive of the world. And as you practice the forgiveness process, you'll be weakening the perceptual output that reflects what your generations have given you. If we go to the Aramaic, the word sin in Aramaic is an archery term. It's got nothing to do with anybody's identity. It's an archery term. And when you fired at the target and you missed the bullseye, the scorekeeper simply yelled sin. It's just, you're off the mark. And when you realize that this energy system is a device that stores every frequency that comes to it. If we listen to Einstein, Einstein says this, on such things as matter, we have been all wrong. There he is, he's right with the course. We've been all wrong. What we have heretofore called matter is energy, energy whose vibrations have been so lowered as to be perceptible to the senses. There is no matter. Einstein says, right in full agreement with the course, there is no matter. There is no material world. Well, Michael, you know, I have this body. Look, if I clap my hands together, they're obviously material, they're obviously solid because they stop each other. Well, actually, if you start to do a little study of physics, you'll find that the reason your hands appear solid to each other is because they have a similar atomic magnetic structure, and that means they create interference patterns for each other. But if I were to, let's say, make my left hand out of radio waves and clap my hands together, what would happen? Obviously, my hand would pass right through. This can't be solid if a radio wave passes through it. Its appearance is solid, but that's a construct of the mind, just like the shiny silver disc is a construct. What if I made both of my hands out of radio waves and clapped them together? They'd appear solid to each other. Nothing solid, obviously, about a radio wave. But they appear that way because of, and that's what interference is basically in your radio or your television set, are simply foreign waves to the construct of the picture or the sound that's being shown to you, and they create interference patterns. That would be the equivalent of your hands appearing to be solid to each other. So as we recognize that this energetic world is different than what we've been taught, we start to see things differently. And the course is saying, you don't have to understand it, all you have to do is practice it. So it goes on to say in this lesson 9, in fact, the recognition that you do not understand is a prerequisite for undoing your false ideas. In other words, the more you insist that what you see must be true, you know, you've got to allow at least a little bit of a question to come in to go, maybe that isn't a shiny silver disc. And if I can put that question in, then I open a space. Maybe I'm not a body. Maybe they're not bodies. Maybe this hostility that I'm experiencing isn't caused by something outside of you. Maybe it's caused by something inside of me. You know, there's another lesson in the course that talks about nothing that you refuse can be brought into perceptual awareness. So the practice of the lessons builds brain cells, builds content that allows a different reflection to occur. And as the reflection changes, you know, how many have read a particular passage in the course? You read a paragraph, and after you finish reading, you go, what did I just read? Let me read that again. I'm sure I just read something, but I don't remember what it was. Let me read it. And you do that 3 or 4 times, and it's like, what happened? And then you go back 6 months later, and you read that paragraph, and it's just, that's as simple as ABC. What was difficult about that? The course is written in a way that energetically it puts you into process. And process means conflicting energies come to the surface mind together. And when conflicting energies come to the surface mind together, there's confusion. You know, if I took, let's say, a red light and I shone it on the board, and I took a blue light and I shone it on the board, and I took a green light and I shone it on the board, each in a different place. Now, we know scientifically there's no such thing as red, blue, or green, that they're interpretations of the mind, but all they are different wave shapes. What if I took all three, red, blue, and green, and shone them on one spot on the board? I wouldn't get clarity on any one of them because those energetic patterns are additive and subtractive, and I'll get a confused mesh of colors. When you read a passage in the Course that resonates conflicted information in you, truth moving into the mind, while untruth is surfacing in the mind, does exactly the same thing. It creates confusion. Oh, I'm sure I read that. Let me go back and read that again. And then once you've clarified that part of your mind, you can go back and read that passage, and it's just as simple as ABC. How could I have ever misread that? That's part of the undoing and the healing process as one proceeds with the Course. So I see nothing as it is now. It is difficult for an untrained mind to believe that what it pictures is not there. And so the undoing becomes a key part in the process. The Course says, your part, there's a part for us to do. The undoing process, it says, it isn't ours. You know, when you realize these energetic patterns are stored generation upon generation upon generation, you know, the scriptures talk about, you know, the sins, the energies that are off the mark are passed to 3 and 4 generations. Interesting ending to that passage. It says, yea, of those who hate me. What are they saying? They're saying that every errant thought, every frequency that comes into the structure is stored in every, on the level where we call them cells, every cell, every energetic part of the structure. And when reproduction occurs, it's passed on to the next generation. Remember that story of the Jews wandering in the desert for 40 years? Do you remember what had to happen for them to get out of the desert? Remember? They said the old generation had to die off. That didn't mean everybody in old physical bodies had to physically die. The root of the word generation is genari. It means cause. All of the causes held in the mind of this world of hostility or fear have to be addressed and removed actively from the structure. When you start looking at, and the scriptures talks about 4 generations, that means that in your structure there's every thought, every feeling, every reality, every energy pattern of 31 people in your bloodline. You ever sometimes have something come up and you go, this doesn't feel like me? Well, where did this come from? Oftentimes it's one of those generational patterns. And of course, where did the 4th generation back get their thoughts, their feelings, their patterns? But from the previous 4. Who got them from the previous 4? Who got them from? Who got them from? You know, if you sit down with a pen and you do the math, in 30 generations, there are over 1.7 billion people in each of our bloodlines. If your task is to undo those things based in hostility and fear in the generations, is it going to take a little time? Yeah, it's a process on the level where time exists. And if you can open to sufficient willingness, that time, the Course says, can be collapsed. And you can move through those things with willingness. And I like to call willingness cosmic grease. Those generational patterns that are based in hostility or fear and create such tight, real perceptions need to be weakened. And generally, for most people, they're weakened a piece at a time, a piece at a time. Each time you forgive, you weaken that part of the output of the mind. You weaken, you weaken, you weaken. There are very rare overnight successes in the process. And it is a process. So each of us is going to tend to go back and have to work through those things, all the while our minds, when these things are stimulated in us, show us a world that justifies those things moving in us and shows us a world where those things are caused by somebody outside of us. To bring back the ownership, to bring back the responsibility. So what the Course says is your part is to merely return your thinking to the point at which the error was made and give it over to the atonement in peace. Well, Michael, how do I do that part? What does that mean? How do I mean, do I go lay on the psychiatrist's couch for 25 years and see if I can find that deep, dark, dirty thing that happened to me and then everything will be okay? No. The Course tells you that your part is forgiveness, is to do your part in the forgiveness process. And for me, there are only two places. I've been doing this work for almost 50 years. And I started when I was 4, by the way. And there are only two places on the planet where I have found a specific, exact technology for how to forgive. And what forgiveness does, I offer, is that forgiveness collapses the perceptual world. And when the perceptual world is collapsed, then the underlying energy that is embodied in the capital W world, that of love, is allowed to enter. So a different mind begins to operate within physiology and within perception. But if you don't collapse the current perception, there's no room for that mind to move in. And what the forgiveness process does, if you look at it from the 1st century Aramaic, is it collapses perception. And when perception is collapsed, whatever's in the mind that makes up the appearance, the perception of the moment, when that perceptual reality, that construct collapses, it collapses in on itself. And when it collapses in on itself, whatever the root is. We were at Heartland a couple of years ago, and there was a young woman there who all of a sudden came up with feelings and thoughts around being sexually abused. And she was pretty distraught about it. But she said, you know, I don't think that ever happened to me. And so I suggested that she ask to be shown. And all of a sudden, a picture of her grandmother came to mind. And her grandmother, who she didn't know, her grandmother had passed away by the time she was 3 or 4. So she had some vague recollection of her, but no knowledge of her. But her grandmother's face came square in her mind and explained to her how she had been sexually abused by her husband, this girl's grandfather, her whole life with him. And so, hence the memory of sexual abuse for her. That just opened a space for a monumental piece of healing. And these generational patterns are not something that you figure out. One of our workshops called Codependence to Interdependence, and in that workshop, I point out what I call the pseudo-solutions of the non-being mind. And the number one pseudo-solution of the non-being mind is, if I could just figure this out, then everything would be okay. No, if you could just do your part, do your work, then everything will be okay. But trying to figure it out, you know, if we took everybody in the room and we asked you your age and we wrote down all your ages and we took away 6 from each age, we'd have the number of years that people in the room have been trying to figure it out, because that's what the world tells us. All we have to do is use our minds to figure it out. When the truth is, in order to heal, you have to be out of your mind. You have to be able to collapse that thing. And to be able to collapse it, you've got to know what drives it. Only 2 places on the planet is a specific technology available. One of them is the 1st century Aramaic language. And interestingly enough, in the Aramaic language, the word forgive is shabag or shabak. And that word means to cancel. Now, if I'm in disturbance and it seems to be about somebody else, do I cancel them? That's murder. That might not work too well. Do I cancel myself? No, that's suicide. That's probably not a good idea. What do I cancel? When you understand what drives this perceptual system, then you have the key to collapsing perception and returning your mind to the point at which the error occurred. I've been working with this particular principle for almost 37 years from the Aramaic, from when I first discovered it. And it always amazes me when people take this forgiveness piece and start to use it. And they start to collapse errant perception after errant perception after errant perception after errant perception. If I could show you the gateway into every dissociated part of the mind. You know, most people live in the state of denial. And our specific definition of denial is that when I think or speak as though something outside of me is the cause of something inside of me, I'm in denial. And after we take an intermission, we're going to come back and look at the other two pieces of the puzzle and the core of forgiveness from both the Aramaic and the Course. Let's take an intermission. All right, so how do you forgive? How does this process work? Obviously, if Harvard is correct, and there's a time frame where 10,000 brain cells fire, and the maximum amount of data that constructs our perception is 9 bits, something has to select which 9 bits of data the mind's going to use to develop its perception. If you knew what that was, then you'd have the key to collapsing perception. If I could show you what that is, would you be interested in using that as a tool? Yes. Well, about 4 people said yes. Yes. Let me try this again. If I could show you what singles out and causes your mind to use certain data to produce perception, the keyway into the dissociated parts of the mind, would that be something you'd be interested in using as a tool? Amen. Oh, good, okay. All right, I thought I'd lost everybody there for a minute, but I'm glad I got you back. So you'll notice, unless you're just a generally nasty, miserable person, you'll know, I've seen 1 or 2 of those, you'll notice that you've never been upset with somebody when they're doing everything you want them to do. Have you noticed that? You're just as happy as a clam with Charlie and Harry and Mary and Hortense until they're not following your infantile goals. And you know that if they just do what you want them to do, then you could be happy, right? How many were brought up in a world where there was somebody who said to you, you know, if you just do this, then I could be happy. And you went, really? That's all you need? Okay, I'll do it. And you did it, right? And then they were happy, right? No. What did they say? They said, well, actually, what you need to do is this. And you went, that's all I need to do? You got it, I'll do it. And then they were happy, right? No, those people were constitutionally unhappy. The perceptual constructs of their mind were based in unhappiness. It had nothing to do with you. But sadly, a lot of people buy the message that I'm the reason they're not happy and there's something wrong with me. And that's one of the core realities that needs to be removed or forgiven or in order to embody as the presence of love. So the keyway into the hidden or dissociated parts of the mind is your goals. When you load a goal in the mind, that goal causes your mind to use a certain quality of data to produce its perception. And the underlying feeling that comes with that perception is a result of the energy that's moving in response to the goal. Now, in the Aramaic language, the word forgive is the word shabag. As I said before, it means to cancel. And in Aramaic, and this is a shock for most everybody, in Aramaic, the way you forgive, the way Yeshua taught 2,000 years ago how to forgive, is that you cancel the goal that you hold that's driving your perception. When you do that, your perception collapses. It collapses in on itself. And when it collapses in on itself, it gives you access to the underlying. What did the Course say? Return your mind to the point at which the error occurred and turn it over to the atonement in peace. How do you return your mind? You look at the goal that's driving your hostility or fear-based perception and you cancel it. Well, Michael, that's crazy. You know, I just want Charlie to love me. That's the only reason I'm upset. Now notice the denial there. Denial is so subtle. I'm upset because Charlie doesn't love me. You're not upset because Charlie doesn't love you. You're upset because there's upset in you. That's why. The mind can come up with 1,000 reasons. Its worst enemy or its best friend can be the reason it gives for its upset. The only reason for the upset is because there's an energy, sin in there, that doesn't belong. And when you load a goal that causes a certain quality of energy that's off the mark to build your perception, you collapse that perception by canceling the goal. Well, but that's reasonable for me to want Charlie. That's a good goal. I agree with you. That's a goal you should have for everybody. Everybody should have those goals for everybody in the world. Well, then why would I cancel it? Because when you load that goal in your mind, it drives you into hostility or fear. And that's your problem, not Charlie's. So when you cancel the goal, you collapse the perceptual output of your mind based in generations and generations of hostility or fear. And then, and when you step into it, and Jeannie will have to make sure everybody gets a copy of the reality management sheet. In the forgiveness process that we teach from the Aramaic, from why is this happening to me again, there's a worksheet process. You go to the website and download it and get instructions on it free from the website. But in step 3, you identify the goal you're holding for whoever your object of attention is. And then in step 4, you take responsibility for making sure that love is conscious, active, and present in your mind. So you identify the way you want it to be, the goal. Remember the line in the Course that says you've got to become aware of the distorting power of the way you want it to be? The way you want it to be will tell you all kinds of lies when you load it in your mind. So when you cancel the goal the way you want it to be, you don't cancel it because there's anything wrong with the way you want it to be. It's a perfectly fine goal. You cancel it because when you load it into your mind, I mean, you know, there's 7.5 billion people on the planet. 7.4999999 people on the planet can load that goal and be perfectly fine. But when you load it, it causes your mind to use hostility or fear to create your perception. And it destroys your energy system when that happens. So you don't cancel it because there's anything wrong with the goal. Perfectly good goal. You cancel it because when you load it in your mind, you have a problem. Now, your mind makes a picture of Charlie and tells you that Charlie is your problem, but that's because you live in denial. You think or speak as though Charlie's the problem in your life. When you think or speak as though Charlie's the problem in your life, you dissociate from the content of your own mind. You hide it from yourself. It's no longer yours. You now wear it right out there on your sleeve, and everybody in Dodge knows what it is that they're supposed to do, except you. They'll bounce off of it and play it out with you. Person after person after person. And you don't know it's there because in order for your mind to build a perceptual reality that the problem is Charlie, remember the Course talks about evidence forever indirect? In order for your mind to build an evidential reality that it's about Charlie, you have to hide the root from yourself. You have to dissociate from it. It's now no longer yours to change. But when you dissociate from it, you add energy to it. And when you add energy to it, you literally, energetically send that message in this energetic world to Charlie. And Charlie will tend to bounce off of it and do the behavior that causes this part of your mind to fire up. And when he does, then what will happen is you'll use that data in your mind to build your brain's picture of Charlie. And Charlie will show up in your mind with your problem attached. But you'll actually think it's Charlie's problem. That's called projection, by the way. Projection is not, as the world teaches, taking something that's inside of you and putting it outside of you. That's externalization. Projection is taking something that's inside of you and making pictures of it, creating perceptions out of it. And so if Charlie rattles these brain cells, then your perception of Charlie will be built out of that. because you loaded a driver that causes your mind to do that. When you cancel that goal, then this picture of Charlie collapses. And now you have returned your mind to the point at which the error occurs. And when you turn it over to the atonement, when you turn it over to the active presence of love, exposed, that dissociated part of the mind begins to dissolve. All hostility or fear begins to dissolve in the presence of love. Now, 2,000 years ago, they said to Yeshua, how many times do we have to do this? Is 7 times enough, Peter says to him? And Yeshua says, well, no, actually, Pete, it's going to take you 77 times 70. Now, you can bet that a bunch of fishermen by the Sea of Galilee weren't going, let's see, 7 7's 49, carry the 4, trying to figure out how many times we're going to have to forgive. In essence, what he was saying is, you are going to forgive an infinite number of times until you're free of what never belonged in your physiology. And that's the core of the forgiveness process. That's actually the first stage of it. The second stage is that oftentimes the things that we need to forgive have been going on in our bloodline for generations and generations and generations. Why do we have to forgive 77 times 70 times? Because the level of information that we're willing to be in touch with is sometimes buried deeply. And so each time you forgive, what happens is you chip away another little piece of the hostility and fear-based mind. Next forgiveness process, you chip away at another little piece, and another piece, and another piece, and another piece, until the mind can't create that hallucination, cannot generate the world you see based in that hostility or fear. And sometimes the energy of that is so huge, and I like to kind of metaphorically refer to this, the fact that, Harvard says 9 bits of data. I like to call this the 9-bit mind. If you've got an issue that's been going on in your bloodline for 100 generations, how long is it going to take you to clean that up with a 9-bit mind? Good luck. It's never going to happen. But what Yeshua taught 2,000 years ago and teaches again in the Course is that there is a feminine elemental force. In Aramaic, by the way, this elemental force is feminine. In the Course, it's referred to as masculine, as it is in traditional Christianity. It's not masculine in Aramaic, it's feminine. It's a feminine elemental force that, when invited into activity, undoes the effects of your errors and teaches you the truth. The Course calls it, traditional Christianity calls it, the Holy Spirit. Nothing to do with the disembodied spirit being. It is an elemental force that will never take over your will. You have free will, it's never going to be touched. It waits for you to say, I'm ready for this to be lifted. I need help. I like to refer to it in more modern terms as the super processor. There's a power in you that, if you're in sufficient willingness, and willingness is cosmic grease, when you've got enough cosmic grease to let the depth of these things open into the deepest, sometimes the most horrific events that have happened in our bloodlines, then that power can process you right down to your genetic toes and remove the deepest roots of those traumatic experiences. And that's the core of forgiveness. Now, if you go to, let me get the numbers here. Go to lesson 164, paragraph 8 in the Course. And here you find Yeshua in his finest Aramaic. Exactly. Only 2 places on the planet that I've found forgiveness. 1 is the 1st century Aramaic teachings of Yeshua. 2 is the Course in Miracles. This is how to do it. I didn't see it in the Course till after I learned it from the Aramaic, but look at paragraph 8. Open a curtain in your practicing by merely letting go all the things you think you want. There's the crux to forgiveness. Open a curtain in your practicing by merely letting go all the things you think you want. Your trifling treasures put away. Leave a clean and open space within your mind for Christ can come. So what the Course is advocating is precisely what Yeshua did 2,000 years ago in saying, if there's a particular way you want it to be, that particular way you want it to be is going to drive your perception insane if there's insanity in you. And the Course calls goals trifling treasures. You know, relative to experiencing yourself as this awesome active presence of love that you started out to be. And the world, the lowercase w world, has taught you to want all kinds of things and have all sorts of things that are more important than functioning as love. You know, sit there and watch Desmond Doss in this movie. And as they beat on him, watch him hold to the one thing that he knows is true about himself. And he doesn't buy any of the other goals. You know, the sergeant comes to him and says, look, why don't you just give that up? And you know, we'll take care of you. We'll get you out of here and everything will be okay. You won't have to go to prison. Like, no, I'm a human being. I'm not going to let go of that one. But the world has taught us all sorts of things that are more important than living as love. And when we want them, the way we do it is to give up love and go into some form of hostility or fear. You know, I need a new car, I want a new house, I want a new partner, I want arm candy, I want eye candy, I want. And all these wants are goals that cause the generational mind to build these perceptions based in hostility or fear. So let go all the things you think you want. If you knew your own wants, there is nothing you want more than to function as the presence of love. I've done a lot of work over the years in prisons. And we had an office in Albany, Georgia. We created a course called Laws of Living for the prison system. We emptied that jail. We cut recidivism by over 90%. The sheriff got rid of it because he didn't have any customers in his jail. And he only got his per diem from the state when he had customers in his jail. He didn't like it. But I remember one day, and I told this the other night, but it's just right there. I was in the classroom, and most everybody coming to the class is someone who's been in prison. And there's this young man who's probably, I'm not even sure what his age would have been, 23, 24, maybe a little bit more. And he's a big guy. I mean, he's 6'6", 300 plus, and 300 pounds of muscle, not fat, just big. And he spent something like 16 of his 23 or 24 years in jail or in prison. And he was sentenced to a pretrial release program that we did through the Superior Court judge there. And what happened was that the inmates, if the judge, you know, we do an evaluation, we call a personal code evaluation, we give the results to the judge, and if he felt this person was recoupable, then he would sentence them to either do the course outside of the jail or start it, and if we reported back, yeah, they're making progress, then he'd let them out, sign a contract, you stay clean for 3 years, your record's expunged, you're clean. Well, this guy's, I mean, he spent 16 or more years in prison and jail. And he comes into the office one day, and my partner's name was Dan McDougall, and they used to call him Mr. Mac. That was their, like, Mr. Mac was his name. And this guy comes in as excited as the little 3-year-old boy could possibly be about his accomplishment. Mr. Mac, I kept Rockma active all week this week. Rockma's the word that represents the filter in the mind that brings love into physiology. And here's this guy who spent all these years in prison, and he's excited as a 3-year-old boy about functioning as love. Everything else is a trifling treasure. Put it away. Every other goal will destroy you. Achieve that, then create all the goals you want. And your mind will never go to hostility or fear again if you achieve that. And if it does, that will be your next forgiveness exercise. That will be the next piece of work for you to do in removing the generational patterns of hostility or fear. So in Aramaic, you cancel the goal, You take responsibility for making sure that love is conscious, active, and present, because it's when those two things meet that the healing occurs. Now, I go back about 25 or so years ago, and I can remember looking back over the previous years and watching miracles happen in people's lives. I mean, what we call physical healings, emotional, relationship, financial. People are in such financial dire straits, and all of a sudden they turn around the next week, they're flush and abundant. How did that happen? And as I started to look at every event where I saw that occur, what became really clear to me was this. Love was conscious, active, and present in them, and something that they had been hiding from themselves came forward. The Course describes that as bring the world you do not want to the one you do. That's why step 4 in the reality management or wake-up sheet is tapping into the active presence of love. And one of the most powerful ways I know to tap into the active presence of love is just to get quiet, breathe a little bit, close your eyes, and imagine holding that newborn. Smile into the face of the newborn, and let the energy of your smile roll up the frontal lobes of the brain. That's where Rachma is. And when it does, that energy center, it's actually a whole separate brain, begins to function. And it is called the mind of Christ. It reflects the mind of Christ in that part of the brain. Where we think in terms of brains, that's a whole other story, physiology or not. But when you have that active and present, then cancel the goal. Allow that to collapse, that perception to collapse based in hostility or fear, and allow whatever's beneath it. You might do the exercise 77 times, 70 times around any given issue to become fully free of the generational influences of hostility or fear. But that's how it's done. And again, the Course describes it this way. Let go. All the things you think you want. Your trifling treasure put away. And leave a clean and open space within your mind for Christ to come. That is for the active presence of love to show up in the midst of your muddle. Just like I said, you know, when you read one of those paragraphs in the Course and you go, oh, did I read that? What was that? That's carrying the vibration of a higher energy that when the lower is exposed, processes the lower. And we define in this work processing as the capacity to keep love conscious, active, and present when something less than love comes up. Allow those things to come up. Purposely search for things that bring those things up. That's what you want. A powerful way to do that is films. I can remember years ago, I used to have the thought, oh, why would I put that stuff in my energy field? I'm not going to that type of film. And then one day I had the guidance to go to this absolutely horrible film. I mean, sickly violence. The opening scene, the movie was called The Island. And I had the guidance to go to it. It's like, I'm not going to go to that film. Go to that film. I'm not going to that film. Go to that film. So I went to the film, and I sit there in the opening scene, you know, somebody crawls up over the back of a boat, and they've graphically hacked this guy's leg off. I mean, it's horrible. It's like, what am I doing here? And the response that I got is, Michael, you have a belief in a world of bodies. Sit here and breathe and forgive, and you don't have to go out and create that in your world. You can use this as a stimulus to show you what's in your mind. And by so doing, you will shift your mind. That's one of the reasons we call them mind shifters. We have another tool we use on Saturday called Mind Shifter. And Mind Shifter is a thought about an issue in your life around which you have negative thoughts, and it's the opportunity to surface, process, and release the negative thoughts. Life is a mind shifter. Life is going to keep coming to you and resonating everything in you that is unlike love. You will do one of two things. You will say, why that rotten, look at what's wrong with them, or you'll say, oh, here's another layer of my hostility or fear. I think maybe I'll own this. I think maybe I'll look at the goal that I hold that's driving this hostility or fear and maintaining it in my bloodline. I think I'll cancel that goal, collapse it, and bring love present and get free of this. Life is a mind shifter. Movies can be a powerful place. If you go to see Hacksaw Ridge, take some wake-up sheets with you. Because it's horrendous, and yet it's one of the most powerful demonstrations of how the active presence of love will actually live in the world of insanity and transform it. It's interesting, after he gets down off the ridge, all the guys who've been beating up on him, wailing on him, criticizing him, shattering him as emotionally shattering as they can, all of a sudden start to follow him. They're supposed to go back up on the ridge the next day. The next day is Saturday. And this guy's a Seventh-day Adventist. He won't work on Saturday. He's already told the army he won't do that. And his sergeant comes to him and he says, Doss, we need to go back on the ridge tomorrow, and I know you don't work on Saturday, but the guys won't go up without you. So these guys who've tried their best to destroy him, when they say human life in action, won't fight without him. And so one of the higher ups is standing by, and they send Doss over in front of the, and this is all based on a true story. They send him over in front of the troops, and Doss stands there and he prays. And whoever it is, the colonel who's given the order to the sergeant to get up there says to the sergeant, get those guys up there. What are you doing? You're supposed to be on. He said, Doss isn't finished praying. And this guy had no idea what was going on. And he looks at him, he's like, nobody go up on the bridge without Doss. And he prays, he gives permission, and they go. Human life is a powerful thing to live. Not necessarily appreciated by those who live over here, but it's a powerful place to go. So this lesson goes on and says, learning that stops short with what the world would teach stops short of meaning. In other words, everything the hostility and fear-based mind has ever said to you is absolutely, totally, and completely meaningless in the actual world, the capital W world that the Creator created. In its proper place. So there's a place for this insane world. It serves but as a starting point from which another kind of learning can begin. A new perception can be gained, and all the arbitrary names the world bestows can be withdrawn as they are raised to doubt. So all of the judgments that you've had, all of the things that you have unconsciously joined within your own mind, begin to dissolve through the process of forgiveness. Now, for those, and I've seen this so often, well, you know, I was on my way, I was booked to speak at Unity in, I'll just say a city so I don't get anybody in trouble. And I called to confirm my arrival there, and this goes back 30 years ago. And the minister said, I understand you teach A Course in Miracles. I said, yeah. He said, then you're not welcome at my church. I said, what? He said, you're not welcome here. What do you mean? Said, you know, these people are crazy. They think there's no world. And we actually had somebody from A Course in Miracles group steal from us because they said there was no world and it didn't matter. He said, that's crazy. And you're not welcome at my church. He said, besides that, you know, it's winter here and we open the place up and 20 people come and they leave a donation of $5 and they think they've really done something. And I can't operate like that. Well, we ended up doing a lot of processing and we actually ended up becoming very good friends, and I did present that week. But people think they made the world. This lesson is very clear. Think not you made the world. So we'd say to our friend from the jungles, think not you made the world. Illusions, yes, but what is true in heaven and earth is beyond your naming. You didn't make this. The Creator created this. And this is Creator stuff. This is Creator stuff. This is Creator stuff made by the Creator. What is the world? False perception. A whole world we made up to overlay what the Creator gave us in creation. Perception is a skill made by you to take the place of what the Creator gave you in creation. And what the Creator gave you in creation is all founded and based in love. But the old causes, the old generations have taught us differently. And most people see exactly what they expect to see. And they see reflections of the content of their own minds. So this lesson says, think not you made the world. Illusions, yes. But what is true in earth and heaven is beyond your naming. When you call a brother, it is to his body that you make appeal. His true identity is hidden from you by what you believe he is. His body makes response to you, to what you call him, for his mind consents to the name you gave him as his own. And thus his unity is twice denied. For you perceive him separate from you, and he accepts his separate name as his. Now let's go back to Einstein again. If you think you're separate or separated from the rest of the world, you're living in an optical delusion. Well, Michael, if that's true, how come everybody sees the same world of bodies? Because we've all been hypnotized. You know, we can take somebody and bring them up here and in 3 minutes flat, have them in a deep somnambulistic state of hypnosis and have them seeing anything. We can have them standing on that stage over there. Now, normally, one stands on the stage and looks at the stage because there's light energy in the room. It bounces off and hits the perceptual receptor of the eye. And we have brain cells for a stage, so our brain produces a picture of a stage, a construct of a stage. Fairly accurate, as the CIA was talking about. But if I interrupt that process through hypnosis, and hypnosis just means the uncritical acceptance of an idea, if I take him out of his visual receptor as source and put him into the auditory receptor, and I tell him that he's standing on the deck of a ship, then that's going to resonate brain cells. And you know what he's going to see? He's going to see himself standing on the deck of a ship. His brain will look at exactly the same thing, or appear to be looking at the same thing, because you can't see anything through your eyes. Only his brain will generate a perception of a ship, because that's what's running his perceptual apparatus. Now, has anybody here ever raised children? How many people have raised children? Okay, if a hypnotist can take somebody and put them into a somnambulistic state and have them seeing things that aren't there, how deeply do you suppose it goes? How many of you, as you were raising your children, did this, and how many times did you do it? Nose, eye, ear, hair, beard. Ladies probably didn't do that. Chin, throat, ear, eye. How many times did you do that? Now you're God to them. You did it 1,000 times. Of course everybody's seeing the same thing. That's the teaching of the world. And it's not accurate. It's not true. Any more than, oh yes, I see the body. Oh yes, I see the shiny silver disc, but it isn't there. Any more than the ship is there that this guy's standing on. If we've been taught to believe that, well, you know, in our family, in relationships, you always get taken advantage of and there's always going to be a problem, then you could be with Yeshua himself or Mother Mary, and there'd still be a problem. Because relationship would cause those brain cells to fire. Until you forgive as to that problem, until you remove the root of that perception, that's what's going to happen. And those around will stand and watch and go, what are you doing? That never, anybody here ever been accused of saying something you never said, doing something you never did? Anybody ever been accused? Yeah, a little laugh there. Now, when that person said or did, or told you what you said or did that wasn't accurate, what state were they in? Were they in this awesome, peaceful, pure, joyful, inner sense, loving place? No. Perception is corrupt data when there's hostility or fear. And every time somebody accused you, they were in this state of some form of hostility or fear. Now that's easy for you to see, right? But when your own mind is using hostility or fear to produce your perceptual world, do you still believe it? Probably. Why? Even though I know better, why? Because it's been going on for 1,000 generations, and I have not reached the root of that errant perception with the active presence of life yet. I have not brought that part of my mind forward, the part I do not want to the part I do. And so around any given issue, any given form of hostility or fear, you may do 77 times 70 forgiveness processes to be released from it. And as you do that, literally, the exposure to love of these errant pieces of data transmutes them so their error disappears. If you need that error, And when I say need that error, there's a great line in that lesson. What is the world? The world is false perception, is born of error, it has not left its source. It will remain no longer than the thought that gave it birth is cherished. If you think you need your hostility to be safe, you can do 1,000,000 forgiveness processes around it. Your hostility isn't going to disappear. You have to start to realize that that world is insane. And a world where anything other than love is true about humans is impossible, though we see it all the time. Why do we see it? Because they're our brain cells. We're not seeing it. We're seeing our own content reflected as our own perception. So once you start moving into a place where you go, this one's mine. Is my name hostility or fear? Well, no, they said I was made of love. Maybe if I remember who I am, and look at that word, remember, to reconnect with who you are. And when you bring that into those places where those generational patterns, they simply begin to dissolve and dissipate. That's called forgiveness. Never forgive anybody ever again for anything. Never forgive yourself for anything, because you can't. If you choose to pardon someone, if you choose to pardon yourself, that's a nice thing to do. Go for it. But reserve forgiveness for the removal or the eviction of every form of hostility or fear of which you are capable. And you are not capable of hostility or fear because of what anybody else has done. You are only capable of hostility or fear because there's hostility or fear in you. It's time to do our work. In my years of work with the Course, there are 2 paragraphs that, for a time period, and I actually at this point, this goes back probably 28, 29 years ago, these 2 paragraphs from this lesson, this is one of the reasons this is one of my favorite lessons, every time I read these 2 paragraphs, I would instantly go into an altered state. My mind would totally shut off, totally step into some kind of other process. I still don't know how to explain it, but I would go into process. And I don't remember how long it was. It might have been 2 weeks, it might have been 6 months. I don't really remember, but every time I read these 2 paragraphs, it would put me into a level of process that I've never experienced from anything anywhere else in my life. And so I'm going to just invite you to get into a quiet place and just let this, if this has that meaning for you. And you know, there are sensitive periods that people go through where they're ready for an energy to move. And for me, I guess I was ready for the energy movement that would come from these 2 paragraphs. But I just invite you to just get quiet and be with these 2 paragraphs. Perhaps even close your eyes to shut down the visual receptor so the mind gets quieter. It would indeed be strange if you were asked to go beyond all symbols of the world, forgetting them forever, yet we're asked to take a teaching function. You have need to use the symbols of the world a while, but be you not deceived by them as well. They do not stand for anything at all, and in your practicing, it is this thought that will release you from them. They become but means by which you can communicate in ways the world can understand, but which you recognize is not the unity where true communication can be found. Thus, what you need are intervals each day in which the learning of the world becomes a transitory phase, a prison house from which you go into the sunlight and forget the darkness. Here you understand the word, the name which God has given you, the one identity which all things share, the one acknowledgement of what is true, And then step back to darkness, not because you think it real, but only to proclaim its unreality in terms which still have meaning in the world that darkness rules. I'm just going to invite you to breathe with that for a moment. You use all the words and symbols of the world, but you don't buy them. You use them to proclaim the unreality of that world. And breathe deeply. Once again, it would indeed be strange if you were asked to go beyond all symbols of the world, forgetting them forever, yet were asked to take a teaching function. You have need to use the symbols, the words of the world, for a while, but be you not deceived by them. They do not stand for anything at all. And in your practicing, it is this thought that will give you release from them. They become but means by which you can communicate in ways the world can understand, but you recognize as not the unity where true communication can be found. Thus, what you need are intervals each day in which the learning of the world becomes a transitory phase, a prison home from which you go into the sunlight and forget the darkness. Here you understand the word, the name which God has given you, the one identity which all things share, the one acknowledgement of what is true. And then step back to darkness, not because you're thinking reality in terms of rules. Every word that our friend from the jungles of South America could say about a shiny silver disc will represent absolutely nothing true about the world the Creator created. Every word that you could say about a body, another shiny silver disc in the mind, about conflict, about pain, about hate and fear, bears no relevance to the actual world that the Course is asking you to let in. Another place the Course says, we're not asking you to do something that's beyond your understanding or your ability. All we're asking you to do is let it in. You might remember that song. Let me in, will you, will you? Let it in. How do you let it in? If you're in the midst of your muddle, in the midst of hostility or fear, how do you let it in? Let go all the things you think you want. Your trifling treasure put away, and your mind collapses, your perceptual world collapses, and makes a space for the mind of love to be fully incarnated. You are made with a birthright of experiencing the truth about yourself as the active presence of love. Your behaviors based in hostility or fear are simply replications of the generational patterns. In our codependence work, we teach about what we call a power person. And the power person is a person who had more power over your life at some stage in your life than you did and wasn't functioning as love, and you perceive the situation as survival. Until one addresses and forgives as to those power person issues, there are only 3 possible behaviors that one can do. And the 3 behaviors are related to the levels of stress that a person's under. And so I just invite you for a moment to think about, maybe the behaviors that nag at you, that you say, why am I not finished with this yet? Why am I doing this to myself again? Or why are they doing this to me again? Why is this happening to me again? Just take a look and see how those behaviors fit with this. When there's no stress, people do whatever they did to get along with their power person. When stress starts to build, people did whatever they do to resist and survive with their power person. When people become ultra stressed, they'll do what their power person did to them that they hated the most. Until those dynamics are forgiven, those are the things that run the world of false perception. And it's not your birthright. And in truth, it has nothing to do with who you are. So this lesson goes on and says, use all the little names and symbols which delineate the world of darkness, yet accept them not as your reality. Ruka Dekuchor, the Holy Spirit, uses all of them, but he does not forget that creation has one name, one meaning, and a single source which unifies all things within itself. Use all the little names the world bestows on them, but for convenience. But remember, they share the name of God along with you. Now that's a statement that's true in the actual world that the Creator created. And then there's going to seem to become a conflict here, because the next paragraph takes you in a totally different place that seems to be contradictory. But when you understand which world it's talking about, it's not contradictory at all. So it's saying that you share the name of God. The actuality of what the Creator created is your name. But do you think in the world of darkness there's a word for that? It doesn't exist. There is not one true word in any language except, I suspect, the Aramaic. Ginny and I were in Europe a few years ago. We were in 3 or 4 different countries. And after the second or third country, I realized, oh my God, a group of people came together and made up these grunts and groans and called them words, and they have a language, and they're actually talking to each other. And that's all Babel. None of it has to do with the actual creation. So the Germans made up sounds they call German, and that's Babel. And the English made up sounds they call English, and it's Babel. And it has to do with what a group of people got together to make up based in the world of false perception. Guess what? The Aramaic language is based in the creation. If you look at the Aramaic alphabet, and the Aramaic language is the language of Yeshua and at least 6 of the world's major religions. There's a reason. It's not because it's a religious language, it's because it's a language that reflects the actuality of the creation. If you look at the Aramaic characters, the letters in Aramaic are 3D shadows of the spin of the atomic structure of the atom. And each letter represents a different element spinning in the creation. It's not Babel. So all of this is Babel and means nothing in the creation. When you translate it into Greek, when you translate it into Latin, when you translate it into English, they're all languages of Babel. Until you can go back to the original creation and the original tools the man gave, it's Babel. And so here the Course is saying, you share one name with the Creator in all creation. You share the name of God. And then the next paragraph says, God has no name. Well, wait a minute, what are you doing here? Is there a single word that can represent the Creator? No. There is no name. And yet, his name becomes the final lesson that all things are one. And at this lesson does all learning end. All names are unified. All space is filled with truth's reflection. Every gap is closed, every separation healed. The name of God is the inheritance he gave to those who chose the teachings of the world to take the place of heaven. Go back to Yeshua says, the kingdom of heaven is here and now. If somebody tells you it's over there, don't believe it. It's a lie. That state is in you, has never left you, and all you need to do is get the gunk out of the way to reconnect with it. All you need to do is forgive what blocks your awareness of it. Teach only love. You need not seek for love, the Course says. You need only seek, find, and release the barriers within yourself you've built against it. So there is not a word that can represent that wholeness, but we can kind of speak about it. That's what I've been doing for this whole time, is speaking about it, around the edges of it, but you can't address the thing itself. And if you open a space, then you can comprehend it. And then when you go to put it in words, it goes, I don't know how to put that in words. Every gap is closed and separation healed. The name of God is the inheritance he gave to those who chose the teaching of the world to take the place of heaven. In our practicing, our purpose is to let our minds accept that the Creator is given an answer to the pitiful inheritance you made a fitting tribute to the Son he loves. No one can fail to find, no one can fail who seeks the meaning of the name of God. Experience must come to supplement the word. But first you must accept the name for all reality and realize that the many names you gave its aspects have distorted what you see. So every word you use, going back to our parable, every word that our friend from the jungles uses to describe a shiny silver disc in some way distorts the actuality of the airplane propeller. That's the world of darkness. And that's our babble. That's what we're doing all the time. How do I resolve that? You learn to stand in a space of active love, and you become a thinker. Now, the world has a cheap copy of everything that's real in the spiritual dimension, and the world's cheap copy of thinking is cycling information. If I say, don't think about the color of your car, what happens? Most people say, I think about the color of your car. Are you sure you're thinking? Or is that just a pure resonance activity? I say, don't think about the color of your car, and brain cells fire, and the color of your car comes forward. Most people call that thinking, and the truth is, if most people said what they thought, they'd be speechless. Thinking is the act of keeping love conscious, active, and present in your mind, no matter what's happening in your world. That's thinking. And when you keep that mind of love conscious, active, and present, then you become a conscious co-creator of your life. And you're not trying to figure things out from this perceptual mind that's separate or thinks it's separate and lives in a whole world of darkness. One name we bring into our practicing, one name we use to unify our sight. And though we use a different name for each awareness of an aspect of the Creator's Son, remember the Course says, you made perception as you would have perception be. So if there's a part of your mind that's filled with hate, and you refuse, you stay dissociated from that hate, somebody's going to come along and resonate your hate, and your brain's going to take your hate and build a picture of this hateful person. That's why the Course says, exempt no one from your love, or you will be hiding a darkened place within your mind where the Holy Spirit's healing power is not welcome. So if there's one person, remember you live by symbols? If there's something in you you don't want to own, you have a symbol for it. And if you live in denial and dissociation, then you project that content into your brain's image of that one, and they become the symbol of your fear, your sadness, your grief, your hatred. And when you exempt that fear, sadness, grief, or hatred from the presence of love, the way you do it, the way you keep it from healing, is you say, well, that person certainly doesn't deserve the presence of my love. And oftentimes, the main person that bears the brunt of that one is the individual themselves. Exempt no one, including yourself, from experiencing you as the active presence of love. Or that person becomes the symbol, the picture, outward expression of the inward condition. And as you begin to forgive as to those things, then you willingly restore the presence of your human life to even that one. The person who won't do that cannot be fully healed. So you made perception as you would have perception be. And we've made up symbols for everything we hold within us. Each individual that you have some form of hostility or fear before is a symbol of that hostility or fear hidden in you and disordering your mind. So we understand that every individual shares one name which the Creator's given them. It is this name we use in practicing. And through its use, all foolish separations disappear, which kept us blind. And we are given strength to see beyond them. Now our sight is blessed with blessings. We can give as we receive. So you come to the point where you begin to make a space, and you make this space by dissolving everything you've been taught you are. And you allow this unfathomable, unknowable, beyond all descriptors, awesome energy. And love is such a weak word. You get to experience that in your physiology. And when you're experiencing that in your physiology, it feels like bliss. It feels like ecstasy. That's where the child starts out. That's why the terrible twos happen, because the child's ripped out of that bliss and ecstasy, and it hurts. And that moment, too, has to go back and be forgiven. And that symbol, the power person, who we thought did it to us, we need to be able to restore our human lives' love in the presence of our thoughts of them. And the more dastardly they were, the more important it is to do that piece of work. You know, this list on this side of the board, as I say, thousands of people we've asked, describe the essence of the newborn. And it's always some variation on the theme of love, and yet those words don't even start. We were out in Washington State. We were teaching in an alternative school with these kids that had been troubled and troublesome kids. They were some of the brightest minds I'd ever seen. And Jeannie did that list on the board, and there was this little girl in the back, 15, 16 years old. And she said, well, my daughter, she was in this school because she'd gotten pregnant at 13 or 14. She said, my daughter, well, she's all of that, but that doesn't even start to describe who she is. Those words don't even start to describe who you are. Do you know your identity, and can you live in your identity? You can't live in your identity if you believe hostility and fear is outside of you. I love the line in the Course that says, you think the problem's outside of you. If it was, you'd really be in trouble. But it's not. It's inside of you, and it's forgivable. It can be removed. And then there's a brief meditation, the last paragraph of this lesson. I'm going to invite you once again to just close your eyes and breathe deeply. Father, our name is yours. In it we are united with all living things, and you who are their one Creator. What we made and call by many different names is but a shadow we have tried to cast across your own reality. And we are glad and thankful we were in error. All our mistakes we give to you, that we may be absolved from all effects of our error, that all effects of our errors seem to have. And we accept the truth you give in place of every one of them. Your name is our salvation and escape from what we made. That's the only escape necessary. Your name unites us in the oneness, which is our inheritance in peace. And I'm just going to invite you to take a few deep breaths on those thoughts. Imagine holding that newborn. In fact, if you would, put your hands in the posture you'd actually have them if you were holding a newborn. And look into the newborn's face. Smile. Look into the eyes of the newborn and smile deeply. Let the energy of that smile rise up your face into the frontal lobes of the brain. And then watch the face of this newborn you're holding transform into your face. And realize the truth that you are this awesome, indescribable active presence of love. Tiny words to describe it with, but let yourself be with that experience and breathe it in. Let it touch every cell in your structure. Let every cell be lighted by that presence of love. And then, as that light lights up every cell, see it expand beyond each cell until the light in every cell joins with the light in every other cell in your form. And as the light in every cell joins in your form, watch the redoubling of that energy as that energy moves out from you. Watch the energy as that energy moves out from every form in the room and connects, joins in that light. Allow that light to normalize every expression of your cellular structure and normalize and support that full expression of love in every person in the room. And then see that light energy as it reaches out beyond this room and it touches the whole town of Ada. When I choose love, it wakes up the love in everyone. A group of people choosing love like this, literally bringing forward that active presence and expanding it outward, extending it. It has to touch every other person made of love. And so as that light redoubles in every person in this town of Ada, see it touching the light of those around them and touching your light and expanding out beyond Ada to the city of Grand Rapids. Strengthening that active presence of love in every cell of every being that it touches. See that light expand beyond the city of Grand Rapids and touching the whole state of Michigan. Millions of people touched by the fact that you chose to tap into active love. See that light strengthening because of your choice to strengthen it. Look for that light shining in every mind. Look with your inner eye and see that light extending from every being in the state of Michigan. What you see in another, you reinforce and strengthen both in them and in yourself. Resolve to see that light everywhere you look. And then watch that light extend out to touch the whole of these United States. 350 million people touched by the presence of your love. Mind after mind after mind after mind, healing by being touched by that presence of love. See that love especially going to the area of Washington, D.C. And see the people who are lost in their fear and hostility right now being touched by that presence of love and strengthening that love in them. Yeshua in the scripture says, you are the light of the world. Be that light. And let's see that light expanding beyond the borders of these United States to Canada, Mexico, down into Central America, South America. Millions of people touched because you chose to intensify the light in you. And then that light expands out from this continent and the southern continent and expands to whole of Europe, Asia, Russia, North Korea, South Korea, the fear-based minds there, ready to fall into the fray over a world that doesn't exist except in their minds. See them touched by that presence of love. 7.5 billion people in the Indian subcontinent being touched by the presence of your love. And now feel as that light and love reflect back to you and strengthen on an even deeper level. You know, when you hit a middle C tuning fork on a desk and you put it near a second middle C tuning fork, the second tuning fork starts to vibrate and sends energy back to the primary and strengthens it. See that feedback loop coming as we strengthen that presence of love in each other. And know that you are the presence of love. It is your birthright. And so it is.
Well, young lady, what do you think?
There we go. Yeah. That was awesome.
Touch me. I haven't looked at that since I did that originally about 6 years ago, and I'm going to watch it again another time or two. It definitely resonated some deep energy for me. So thank you for the opportunity to watch it once again.
I really like the part when you say, it always gets me when you say to release what was never meant to stay.
Mm-hmm.
That bit always catches.
Yeah, and most people are living their whole lives out of it. You know, it's just, it's, when you really start to look at it, it's pretty bizarre and insane, but by and large, it's what runs the world. So we're here to change the game. So does anybody think your game is going to be changed by listening to that? Any thoughts, anything to share, anything that touched you? Any questions for anyone that's listening? I'm glad you all hung in with it. I know it was a long presentation, but and it will be there. You know, I realize, you know, the fact that I originated that, and I think it was about 6 or 7 years ago that I did that lesson. And I learned some new pieces of my own work and my own puzzle in doing it. So that'll be in Yinka's archives, and you can watch it over and over. And each time, you know, the mind can only structure a construct out of the content that it's got. And you can only take so much new content in at a time. So each time you watch it, it will transform your perception. It will transform. It will transform. And at some point, there'll be just this major blast, this major breakthrough. And it takes time to do it. You have to build the brain cells. You go back to Yeshua 2,000 years ago, and he says his work is only for those who have the eyes to see and the ears to hear. I think we can fairly safely assume most everybody in his audience had what we call physical eyes and ears. That wasn't it. It's got to be in brain cells. You know, if I speak a word and you have the same brain cells connected with that word in your mind, then we're going to be able to actually communicate. But if I have a different set of brain cells for what's going on with these words, then your mind produces a perception, but it doesn't match mine. There's a powerful film out there. It's pretty violent, pretty vile. It's called The Accountant. And right at the end, it wasn't the film so much, but at the end of the film, there's a song that the film closes out with. And I forget the songwriter's name now. It's been a few years since I watched it. But it was just like one of those moments for me of insight. And obviously this songwriter had the brain cells to be able to write this. And what he's saying, what the line in the song was at the end of this movie, The Accountant, it says, "You can't read a book that you haven't written." And people say, "Well, Michael, I read your book." You haven't read my book. You may have gone through the pages and the words that were there. But when I read that book, I have certain constructs in my mind, and I guarantee they're not the same as the constructs in your mind. That's why ultimately each person has to do their own work, and they have to write their own book. They have to come to their own personally experienced. You can't live it off of mine. You can't live it off of somebody else's. And so each time you listen, you'll build a new set of brain cells, a new set of brain cells, a new set of brain cells, and you'll come to the point where then there's transformation. And that will come from the work you do, not the work I do, not the work Yeshua does, not the work Buddha does, not the work Mohammed does. No, it'll come from the work you do. And most people don't want to face what's in them and don't want to do their work. So welcome to doing your work.
Yes.
Questions, thoughts, answers, ideas.
I'll just open it up so you can just raise your hands if you want to unmute. I'll just
Someone has a question, raise your hand. Let's talk about it.
I think you can just unmute as well. You've got a question or something you want to share? Jane
No
has-
questions from anybody? That all just fit and made sense? Well, that's awesome.
Yeah. I
I'm
have a
delighted.
question.
Go for it.
Okay. So I was doing the wake up sheet,
Yes.
and I think it's I don't understand this one section. Julia keeps explaining to me, but like I need to
Okay,
yes,
go
I
ahead.
need to hear it again.
New
So
brain cells need to be built. That's good.
so the question is, I need to do it. So
And I understand that sometimes it can be difficult to reconstitute a perception where that question exists to get it back into expression. So remember that
sorry.
on a radio show, we're always there to answer questions, and or you can download the app. Just type Heartland Aramaic Forgiveness in your app store, and in the app, you can ask those questions the minute they're fresh and alive. Send it to us right from the app. We'll answer it on the radio show, send you a link back that gives you the exact time and when we answered it. So
Thank you.
but
I
go for
found
it,
it.
Alexander.
So step 6 is I now feel, I guess, relieved, and
Right.
B, I don't understand because it just grammatically makes no sense. Because it says now and about the situation, listen, see that, and I now feel and see that. Like, see what?
Okay, so I now feel, so once I do the forgiveness, the core of canceling the goal, inviting that power in to support me, what do I feel? Most people, it's usually something like relief. And then about number 1, see that. So I'm going to go back and look at my whole story in number 1. I outlined a whole perceptual construct that I started with. What is that perceptual construct for me now after
Okay.
forgiveness? So usually, here's what I usually get. Over 40 years of doing this and walking hundreds of people through the process, people usually, when they do number 1, it's a big thing. It's like, so, oh man, it's so big. It's so, I mean, it just controls my life. This has happened so many times. Why are they doing this to me again? And then they get down to number 6 and it's like, why was that such a big deal? Well, here's why it was such a big deal. You had unprocessed energy that were a big deal for you. And when you open the space to process that energy, and remember, our definition of processing is the ability to hold love conscious, active, and present when something less than love comes up. And as you do that, you burn off the big deal. And so usually when people get down to number 6B, it's like, I don't really see why that was ever such a big deal. Because now you've burned the energy off. So it's just asking you to review how the situation you started, how it's changed. You're documenting for yourself the way that it's changed. And then the question is asked to look at a time when you have not fulfilled the goal that you're demanding somebody else fulfill. And that usually gives people a way to get another look at how their projection goes. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Thank you. I really understand.
Delighted. Cool. Awesome. Thank you. Good question.
Thank you. Thank
All
you
right.
very much.
Honored. Anybody else? Come on, Corey. You've always got a question for us.
Tonight, I am really so tired. Really,
Are you?
But I listened and it is every time there comes something more and more, and also the repetition is so important. Also now the conversation which you had now before is also very helpful for me.
For me, what touched me and actually at one point had me in tears is I'd forgotten that I had integrated my experience from watching the movie Hacksaw Ridge into this particular video. I did this video at the time when that Hacksaw Ridge movie came out. And I didn't remember how powerfully it had impacted me. And for me, listening to this today for the first time in whatever it is, 6 or 7 years, listening to it, it was what struck me so powerfully was that it gives us a way to bring such a transformed perspective of life into our own little problems. I mean, when you think about it, the scene literally in the movie, again, it's based on a true story. These guys are just getting decimated by the Japanese. They come down off of this ridge where they're being decimated. He stays up there, and then they call in their big guns that are in ships just offshore, and they say, shell the hell out of these Japanese. And this kid is sitting up on top of this Hacksaw Ridge. It's literally a true place. And they're just bombing the hell out of it. I mean, it's just raining fire down on this thing. And this guy just sits there, I mean, in the middle of these bombs blowing up all over him. And the Japanese swarming the island. And he just sits there and he listens. Guide me. How can I save a life? And then he gets up and walks to someone. And in a couple of cases, there's one of the guys, I mean, it's literally one of the ones, remember I talked about how the sergeant says, tell us who did this to you. We'll take care of it for you. He's like, oh, I just fell out of bed. I mean, they literally just beat the shit out of him. And that's one of the guys he pulls down off the ridge. He's a human being functioning as love with someone that most people would go, die, you son of a bitch. Die, go for it. Let me inflict more suffering on you is what the average person would do. But here's this example of somebody living as a human being in I mean, some of the most horrific trauma you could imagine. So that's what struck me here, was the reminder of how powerful the visual is, that we can be that. We can actually do that in the presence of family dynamics, cultural dynamics, political dynamics, parental relation, that we can actually do what he did. And, it's a story that's been repeated over and over and over and over and over again. You go back and you hear the same story in the ancient scriptures, and these scriptures aren't about religion. They aren't about theology. I think it's sad that people made those stories about theology and made religions out of them. But you look at this case where, this story about this man named Yeshua, this is just like real life. And you see him, he goes in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he literally, as a naturopathic physician, what I see there is, they say he sweats blood. This is a healing crisis. This is him detoxing his genetic history. And then he steps out, and there's one of his henchmen, a guy named Peter. And Peter has said to him on the way to this experience, he said, how many swords should we bring? And Yeshua says, just bring one. And, when you realize you got somebody who's coming from the right side of the board, the hostility and fear-based mind, can you imagine the joy in Peter's mind and his rage and his pain as he thinks about this hero of his who's going to take a sword and wipe out the whole Roman army, the enemy? And then, as Yeshua steps out of the Garden of Gethsemane, there's Peter with a sword in his hand. If the world could just hear this one lesson, what Yeshua said to him is, Peter, if you live by the sword, you will die by the sword. If you live in your hostility and fear, then that's what's going to kill you. It won't be somebody else's sword that kills you. It will be the sword of your own tongue and your own mind that will bring about the results that will literally cause your death. And you could change that and choose not to die. You could change that. So he turns to Peter, and you'll notice in that scenario, and this is just like, to me, this is just Hacksaw Ridge in a different time setting. He turns to Peter. Now, Peter, the high priest servant is the arch enemy. So Peter takes out his sword and whacks off his ear. And what does Yeshua do? He does the human thing. He goes over to the guy who's going to mercilessly slaughter him, and he heals his ear. He does what a human being would do. If we can just get a critical mass of people who will actually function as human beings, the whole world is going to transform. The game is going to change. We just have to get enough people. Yeshua was a physicist. He said a little leavening leavens the whole loaf. He was not talking about bread. He was talking about just a small number of people would take who would actually incarnate in this world, in physiology, the active presence of love. And when a small number of people did that, it would be a strong enough energy field to create a critical mass that would transform the whole of humanity. We don't have to go and get every vicious mind. We don't have to go and get every Hitler or Mussolini or Bush or Trump. We don't have to get all of those people to change. All we need to do is our work, create a critical mass, and that critical mass will transform the whole process. That's why I do what I do.
I believe
Rushmore.
that we are. Oh, hi,
Go ahead.
Dr. Michael. Jan, otherwise known as Rushmore. I believe that, and when I really do say I believe in this moment, I'm not coming from my logical linear, but completely from my visceral core, highest high self temple of perfection, that we are in the state of that going on in our human behavior embodiment now as a collective consciousness. And it's a lot bigger than what it used to be. But certainly, who knows how many can come through and be of this presence. Yes. The invitation has been dropped, in other words. Let us go and be game changers.
The invitation has been dropped, and those who respond, you know, you think of the veil as the barrier between the unseen world and the seen world. And we think that the unseen world has to supply the seen world to transform it. But actually, the way the creation works is the seen world, we have to create the conditions and become the space that brings the energy through from the unseen world to create the transformation. It doesn't happen the other way around. Cause is here. What are we doing with it? And when enough of us become that space, it will bring through the total, complete transformation of it all. So I'm with you. Yeah. Sweet. Cool. Hope that's making sense for everybody. If there's anybody it's not making sense for, raise a hand. Let's talk about it. See if we can help to integrate it, help to bring it to another level. And Yinka, do you have any thought? Oh, Jane?
Yes, let me see if I can get myself on the camera here.
Okay. I love that picture of the cell you have on your, it's great. You got to send it to me.
I sent it to Yinka and she was
I
gonna
did send it
to me.
on Facebook, but I'm not sure if you received it.
Oh, okay. Cool.
I'll resend it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I'll just say my brains are mush and, you know.
That's a good place to be.
It totally, I believe, you know, confused, just, I landed on the call, low energy, sore throat, you know, that kind of stuff.
Detox.
Been going on for a couple of days. Yep. Initiation, whatever you want to call it. And as I listened to, you know, the Course in Miracles, I began to feel more energy. I didn't need to take as many vitamin C as I would have. And, you know, the thing is, I just knew if I could bring my body to where the truth was, and this is definitely truth, that even though my brain wasn't taking it all in, some part of me was for future reference.
That's the important part. You got to be out of your mind.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you, I was so touched. I was in a public place when I was listening to part of the talk, and I was so touched by, you know, the man you were sharing about that was taking the bullets because in his heart, he just wanted to save another human being. And
that's it.
It just reminds me of a prayer that I've learned from 12 steps over the years. And because I've learned this prayer, it allowed me to go, of course, I totally believe that. I get it. Yeah, sure. And the prayer is, God, I offer myself to thee to build with me and do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me from the bondage of self that I may better do thy will. Grant me strength as I go out to do your bidding. And that part was like, that's what was happening there.
That's
so
awesome.
it was powerful. Yeah. And I felt that protection in my life.
Sweet.
When I felt like I was, you know, going out to do service. I definitely felt God was totally there in situations that were frightening. So yeah, powerful.
Very sweet. Thanks for sharing that. You know, if you go back to the 12-step work, if you look at the history of the 12-step work, it came out of a group that was called the Oxford Group.
Yes.
And they were working with the Aramaic language and the Aramaic
teaching. I
teaching.
didn't know that.
It came out of the Aramaic. Yeah. Yeah, that's where it came from.
Wow. I knew of the Oxford Group many years ago, but yeah, wow. Oh
and
my
what you referred to, and you know, to me, the fact that we can be this for each other, you know, most of churchianity, and I don't care which brand it is, from the east to the west or the north or the south or whoever it is, most of churchianity, it's like, well, we have the only hero and the savior. But when they were talking about this process of real healing, was that we have each other as human beings to lift each other up when we're in that healing space, when that processing is going on and confusion and symptoms and, oh man, I feel horrific. And when I can reach out to someone else and have their hand lift me up, or their energy field. You know, there's an interesting passage in the Aramaic scriptures where there's a woman who has what in that description they call a 12-year issue of blood, which means she's got a period that's been going on for 12 years. That's a pretty traumatic thing in a culture where a woman's only role is to feed her family. And with a period going on, she can't even go in her own kitchen for 12 years. And what we hear is that she knows that she has to touch the hem of his garment. And they're not talking about touching a piece of cloth. She knows that she needs to go to a higher space of clarity, love, and support to process herself through it. And the fact that we are that or can be that for each other. What I heard you describing as you came here, and you had this whole community of people who were there to hold the space for you and lift you up so that you could throw off what was in process. When we do this, off here by ourselves, and we're at a certain level of energy, it can take a long time to process through that. But when I come and touch the hem of all of your garments, I touch literally your energy field connected to love, then I can be uplifted, and we can do that for each other. Literally every one of us is capable of that. It's not something special reserved for somebody named Jesus or Muhammad or Buddha or anybody else. We're here to be that for each other. And
I
that's, to me, what
totally
we
believe
really are
that.
about.
I totally believe that. And yesterday was my birthday, and I was
Happy
feeling
Eternal Day.
horrible. Thank you. I was just feeling so horrible, like no energy and sick, and like you say, toxic,
Symptomatic.
elimination. And my sister called, who I adore. We had a great conversation. A dear friend called who, moved to another state. We had a great conversation. I did a midnight meditation with a group of people last night that I've become close with. And each one of those, I just felt better and better and better. So yeah.
They allowed you to touch the hem of their garment.
Yes. Yes.
That was it.
Yeah.
This isn't about religion. It's about where we as human beings are designed to live. That's my point overall, and overcoming the stigma of what religious abuse is made of so many of these basic principles, to me, is an important part of the work. And recognizing what we can be with and for each other is just so important and so powerful.
True that.
Sweet. Awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Jane. That was a nice opening for everybody, I think. For me.
Awesome.
Yeah. All right. Blessings.
And happy birthday, Jane.
Yes. Happy Eternal Day. In our family, we don't celebrate birthdays. We celebrate eternal days.
Awesome.
It's interesting. We live in a world when you realize mind energy is the key to what organizes physiology. People will say to me, we have a granddaughter that we take care of 2 to 3 days a week. And they'll say, how old is your granddaughter? And I'll say, she isn't. And they go, what do you mean? How old is she? She isn't. She's been circling the earth for 4 years, 5 actually next week. Is she old? Why do we brainwash? Why have we put this whole idea that a child of 4 is old? Why is that mind energy going in? What are we doing to ourselves? We're designed to be eternal. And when we touch into the truth of who we are and extend ourselves to each other, then we raise each other above that fray, and life just becomes a different game. So that's what we're here to do, is create a different game. Well, thank you all for being here. We're still having a conversation about whether or not we're going to do the intuitive development intensive. That is a possibility. We do have the self-study codependence to independence intensive complete as it is. There's over 90, if this 2 hours of video touched you, there's 90 hours of live processing, live interaction, all the teaching, all of the processing, and including the still point breathing process in that 90-hour video package. So if you're interested in taking your work to the next level, that's another way to step up to the next level, and a way to support us as well in getting this out on a global scale. Since we stopped traveling to come here and take care of our granddaughter and my wife's dad, up until about 5 years ago, we traveled 6 to 10 months of the year. We were all over the globe. And we stopped doing that. So it's put a hole in our cash flow. And so if you want to support us, that's the way to do it, is tap into that 90-hour video package, do the self-study, the whole package, including personal code evaluation pre and post to show you exactly where your work is. The whole package is $600 US. And if anybody's interested in doing it, we'll certainly work with you if we need to on how to set up a payment plan or something to do it. We have a monthly Mind Shifters and Still Point Breathing workshop, which happens this weekend. It's 11 o'clock Eastern time in the United States on Saturday morning and Sunday morning. So there are spaces in that. We've just got a small group. So if you're interested in doing that, that's another way to participate and support us. So delighted to be here. Thanks, Yinka, for all the work you do. Hope your vacation was wonderful.
Yes, it was. I went off to Ireland.
Cool.
Was,
nice.
But I wanted to say as well, for those for the codependency course and Still Point Breathing, I highly recommend, because I do also been part of those. But I was thinking, Michael, today, what about doing a taster of the codependency course? That then it could either a small clip it or something that people could then have an idea of what's involved in the codependency, and that may also draw more people into having to join it as well.
Well, maybe next week when we do the Why Is This Happening to Me Again, we'll talk a little more about that. It's actually, we do codependence to interdependence, Why Is This Happening to Me Again, Healing Through Relationships, Mind Shifters, Still Point Breathing, and communication. Did you hear what I think I said? So that's all part of that 90-hour package. And so, again, if this 2-hour snippet impacted you, that 90 hours is a sequential unfolding of a whole program that heads into cleaning up this codependence game. And of course, codependence is pretty simple. Virtually everyone who comes into this world,
there is such a word as
by the age of 4.
Same thing with quantitative.
Could somebody mute themselves there? Virtually everyone by about the age of 4 is a codependent, is a member of the one world universal religion of blame. It's all somebody else's fault. So when I think or speak as though what's happening out there is the cause of what's moving in here, I'm in codependence. Until I clean that up, I can't clean up what's happening in here. And so it's many, many years of work that's integrated into that 90-hour presentation. And the personal code evaluation is something that's based on what's called the MMPI, which is a Minnesota multiphasic personality inventory. It's kind of the gold standard of psychological testing. And we've set that up and developed that. It's done on a computer, and it gives you specific feedback. It takes about 30 minutes to do online. And it gives you specific feedback on where are the holes in your mind? Where is your blockage of truth? What are the assignments that will help you to correct those parts of your own mind and your own process? And so you get specific assignments. And then at the end of the course, when you complete it, it's included to do the evaluation again. So you can see how effective your work has been, and you get your next level, your next set of assignments. So that's all part of the process in the codependence to interdependence communication practicum. Cool. Well, if there are no other questions, thank you for joining us. We appreciate you. Hold you in a blessing, and we'll see you next Thursday.
I'm just going to leave.
We do the next step of Why Is This Happening to Me Again?
Hi, it's me, Gina.
Oh,
what do you mean,
hey,
old?
young lady?
What do you mean, old?
It wouldn't be a session, Gina, if we didn't hear your voice. So I'm glad to hear from you.
I'm glad to have a voice. Thank you. Yeah, I've always comprehended that Bible verse with the woman with the flow of blood as literally a flow of blood. Is that a literal Bible?
She had a period that wouldn't stop. That was her physiological expression of her disease.
Yes.
And she knew that what she needed to do was to get to a higher level of vitality than what she was at. You'll notice in that story, the religionists want to say Jesus did it for her. But if you listen to him, Yeshua says, no, lady, it was your work. You're the one who made the breakthrough here.
Your faith made you well.
Uplifted you and offered the support energy. And again, that's what we can each do for the other.
All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Cool. All right.
Yes,
blessings, everybody.
I'm just
Thank you, Yinka.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, blessings.
All right,
Thank you,
take care.
Michael.
Good night,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Yinka.
You're
Thank you
most
very much.
welcome. Most welcome. All righty. Bye-bye.
And deserving.
Love it.
Yeah, me too. Get well soon, Jane, darling, and happy birthday.
Oh, thank you so much, Gina.
You're welcome.
Good night.
Night, night.
Night, everybody.